Okay. And thank you all for joining. This is very informal, and it's the three of us. As you know, I'm Letecia, um, and my sister Tony's here, my cousin Carrie's here, and this is our third virtual conversation, and we're just talking about building healthy families, because that's a very important topic. Family is very important, and it is important to have the support of family, and just building healthy families at a time like this is so important. So, Tony.
Awesome. Thank you. So, as some of you may know, and I will introduce myself. I am Antonia. All my friends call me Tony. I'm an artist for about 25 plus years, so this is my studio. But I am really interested in this topic because of my own mental health journey, as you'll hear as we start to get talking. So, again, I'm Antonia.
And our cousin Carrie.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me. Glad to be with you in this virtual space today. I am an ordained minister in the Methodist Church. I've been in ministry for 23 years. And from my family and from being in ministry, my eyes were open to the pandemic, if you will, of mental health and the stigma around mental health. And so I'm passionate about this area. I've become certified in mental first aid, and my eyes have been open. And so I'm just glad to be in this space with you today.
Awesome.
And thank you so much. Yeah, and so you definitely know the importance of just talking about this topic, you know, definitely important. Um, and so we'll just jump into the first question. The first question, which is, what is a helpful way to build a healthy family member when a family member is struggling with a mental health diagnosis? And anybody could jump in. I would say, well, no, I don't have to go first. Anybody can go first.
Well, one of the things that came up for, I think, myself is communication is really important. Communicating, whether it's deciding one person in the family who's going to talk to that person or the doctors or what have you, but it's important to build a stream of communication. What tends to happen is when someone has a mental health diagnosis, I know it happened in our own family, people shut down and they don't want to talk about it. And so keeping the lines of communication, I think, is really key to keeping that person safe and to make sure that everyone's on the same page. I would say communication is really key.
Yeah, that's important.
Communication is important. I would add resources. And a lot of people just don't understand mental health. They don't understand mental illness. And so, even as parents, even as different components of a family, get all the resources that you can to understand what it is. I know when my wife and I were expecting, I got a few books on what to expect when you're a father and when you're a parent. And, I tried to resource myself. And so, a lot of times in families, with the stigma around mental health, we just don't get the resources that we need. And even some healthcare providers aren't good in this area as it relates to resources. And so I would say that every family should make sure that you resource yourself with some great information, learn more about this topic. One out of every four adult is suffering from a diagnosable mental health illness. And so that is about 25%. And so it is a large number. And so all of our families are affected, our houses of worship are affected. And so we need to learn more about this and receive all the resources that we can.
And that is so true, resources, because it's definitely important. And looking at, you mentioned about medical healthcare providers, one way to start is right on the back of your insurance card, calling the 1-800 number, because some people might not be sure where to start. How do I find one? Um, I know myself, and of course, Tony, she can attest to this too. I've had experience with multiple doctors and multiple healthcare providers. And sometimes it's going through different ones to find the right fit, because everyone, they're not that experienced when it comes to our issues. And sometimes you might have to get a different therapist, get a different doctor until you find the right fit for you. So that's good as far as resources, having a support team, support group. It's very important to surround yourself with positive people. Trying to go through this by yourself, I mean, you can get through it, but it'll be a lot easier if you have a good support system, just to surround you and going through things like that. Tony, I don't know if you want to address as far as different healthcare providers.
I just know that there were times, especially when we're talking about building a healthy family, there are times when in the past when I've had to walk a road, I've never been by myself. That's the key. I was never by myself. It might have looked like I was by myself, but I was never alone, and I was never by myself. And so, as you navigate, you get a little older. You understand that not every when you said not every provider is like the best provider. And I'm probably jumping ahead of myself, but that's okay. I'll bring it up now. I remember just a few years back when I was on that road and I was in crises. And as a family, we had to deal with it as a family because most people are not just by themselves. You have to deal with it as a family. And so I just know that understanding, knowledge, wisdom, common sense, common sense, because at one point I know one of my the healthcare team suggested an avenue for me that common sense. Everybody was like, excuse me, are you sure that's the right path we want to do? And I don't know if you recall, T, so this is when I was I had deep depression, and I was pregnant at the time with Imani.
Mm-hmm.
And they were suggesting an avenue of care for me
Mm-hmm.
that
I remember.
did not keep
Yeah,
in mind with my dignity and didn't keep in mind with who I was as a person.
yeah,
And so it took at the time I was very coherent. But I didn't know which stream of care to use. And ultimately it was me and Michael who made the decision, but it was common sense. I
mm-hmm.
had to actually say, you know what? I might put my child in jeopardy by doing that. I'm pregnant. I don't want to do that. So it's things like that where you have to use common sense, wisdom, and each member of that family coming together to help that person. I think it's really important.
Yeah. And I think too, just by some experiences that you had, you were able to help me along the way when it was my turn, going through finding resources as far as healthcare providers in a hospital. You were able to count me to, I remember one time particularly came me to my doctor's appointment, and me not really understanding how to advocate for myself, and you were able to kind of walk me through, okay, write your questions down, this is what you talk about, this is what you discuss. And that's definitely a way of building healthy family relationships, because if a family member is in crisis and is struggling, they may not be able to um, verbally say what's going on, or they might be nervous. So if you have another family member that could go with them to their appointments, that could advocate for them, that definitely helps to build healthy relationships. So that was very helpful. The time you were able to help me and show me, like, write your questions down, this is what you do when you go to your appointments and things like that. So that was very good for me, which leads into the next one, which is love. So how does love help to build healthy families?
I think love is essential to building healthy families because that is really the foundation. And
Mm-hmm.
so, what I share with my family members and even church family members as well is that you are whole as you are. As
Mm-hmm.
God created you, God loves you, I love you. And And a lot of times that is affirmation for a lot of people who may experience a crisis, to know that you are whole as you are right now. And we're not trying to fix you. Perhaps there is a prescription you need to take. And so fill your prescription, take your prescription. But
Mhm.
you are already whole because you are made in the image of God. And so, therefore, when we let people know that you're loved, I mean, genuinely loved, then that strengthens them and that lets them know that they are not alone. And so
Yeah.
again, is one of the greatest gifts of God is the gift of love, and it's unconditional, whether good times or bad times. And so, in a family, studies have shown that when children are loved, they do better. They're more resilient,
Yeah.
and again, they handle adversity better than those who don't feel like they're loved. And so, in this situation, love is so critical for the well-being of everyone in the family.
Yeah. That is love is that is true. And I can honestly say, if it wasn't for the positive people that were around me to show me love and just small acts of love, just when I different times I lost my appetite because of the medicine. It was certain family members, they will cook certain foods. Some they will send a text message or they'll call, I'm praying for you, I love you. And it was just those encouraging words to let me know, okay, I have people, that have my back. So that love is very important. Tony, anything you like to add?
I would say when, and I totally agree. I totally agree. When you were saying, Cary, about loving who you are, like as you are right now,
Mhm.
that really resonated with me. And it can be practical. Practical things really help. You might not know what to say, but being willing to be present, even among a crisis, is really important.
Yeah.
And um, I remember when I had been in the hospital. I had been coming up the top part of the mountain, and it was going well. And I was about to come home, and I will never forget. I'll never forget, because when she said it, it hit me, and I knew she loved me. I had talked to my stepmom, Carolyn, and I talked to her, and I said, well, they said I'm coming home in a day or two, and she says, well, look, you tell me what you want, because I'm gonna fix it. And
Yeah.
that's what families are. You might not know what to say but the thing about it is that people sometimes don't understand that a mental health crisis is a crisis just like any other health crisis.
Right.
And so you would, in turn, you would treat that person with dignity, and you would also maneuver just as a family, just as you normally would. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. That's that's key. That right there. Sometimes it's something so simple and small. We might not know how to fix it or what to say, but something so small, so simple. I want to kind of shift a little bit and just bring up the importance of spirituality and building healthy families. Now, I don't care if you want to just start off addressing this because you are ordained minister, as far as the importance of spirituality in building healthy families.
Spirituality is very important, and it doesn't matter your faith, it doesn't matter your denomination or your affiliation. Doctors and scientists are really researching and finding that people of faith, whatever the faith is, they are more resilient as it relates to mental health and physical health and just healing and recovery as well. And so our spirituality is a part of us, just like our mental health is a part, just like your physical health is a part, and even social is a part. And so we're in this age now of social distancing, and that is plaguing people. It's causing some people to have, crises because they're not physically around and able to interact with anyone, and they feel isolated and lonely. But spirituality is important, and I want to underscore good spirituality. And
Yeah.
so, in the church or in other places of worship, people have used their faith in scriptures to, hurt people with them, abuse people with them. That the reason you're going through a crisis is because you don't have faith. The reason you're going through what you're going through is, you don't have a serious relationship with God. And so instead of supporting people, we tear them down and we twist the scriptures and we criticize people and beat them up with scripture. And so, as it relates to spirituality, religion is one thing, and spirituality is a totally different thing. But all of us have been created in God's image, and therefore we are spirit. And so, because we are spirit, then our spirituality is very important. It can strengthen our minds, it can strengthen our bodies, and it can strengthen, our outcome on life. But again, I've heard and I've seen too many, ministers and other faith leaders abuse people and really shun them because they don't have the proper information, and people suffer more so at the hands of the church because people are in areas that they are not qualified to really be discussing. And so, but and so that's why I got some certifications because I realize how important this is. And even with all of that, I still refer, but I welcome people using spirituality as a part of the plan. It is not
Yeah.
the only component, but it is a vital part of the plan for wholeness. And so it is very helpful and it should be a part of the plan, but other things should be a part of that plan, as well. And
Yeah.
I remember when my father passed, your uncle, I was struggling with that and dealing with that. And I had to see a therapist around that.
Yeah.
Because I'm around death so often as a minister. And then when it hit home for me and the conversations that we had, and, we prayed, we wanted our fathers to have long lives and, all of that. And
Mm,
so God had another plan. And so I struggled with that and received the help that I needed,
yeah.
during that time. And, I'm not ashamed to discuss that. It
Yeah.
was needed and it was very helpful along with my spirituality. It doesn't mean I'm less than,
Right.
but it was just another avenue that I needed to, receive in order to bring about the wholeness that I needed to have.
And I think that is so important what you said. I think, well, first, I believe a lot of the churches, they're now starting to understand the importance of really openly addressing mental health and addressing that it is okay to go to your therapist. It's okay if you need a prescription, go ahead. It is okay for that. And I think it is important when congregations, they hear their leaders openly talking about mental health. And yes, go to your counselor. Yes, go to your therapist. Go to your this, just like if you have diabetes or health issues. That's important when the congregations, when they hear their leaders openly talking about it, then it's like, oh, okay, so it is okay. Because I was even talking to Tony about this. A lot of the things that we were taught, it's like we have to shift our mindset of even thinking about it, where we would think, okay, they must have sinned. That's why they're going through, or they're being punished by God, or if they only
Exactly.
had enough faith.
Right.
You know, there are a number of times where I was like, okay, God, where did I sin? Or what did I do? I'm sorry. I was constantly repenting. And I was like, you know what? It doesn't necessarily mean you did something. It's just sometimes things happen and you don't have to think God is punishing you. So even my way of looking at my diagnosis, that had to change. And God is still changing the way I address myself and accept myself about the diagnosis. It's just a diagnosis.
Right.
It's just a label. It does not define me.
Right.
I am whole. I am healthy. I'm living a prosperous life. I'm going to continue to live a prosperous life. I'm not married yet. Eventually, when that time comes, I will have a healthy family. And there was another fear too, wondering, okay, if I do have children, what if my children have a diagnosis? And if they do, I'm going to love them just as well as if they don't, whether they're my biological children or if I adopt children. So our mindsets, they have to change. And I believe previous leaders, they meant well in
They
certain
did.
things that they taught because they were doing the best that they could. but our minds have to shift and we have to start looking at things a little bit differently, you know. Tony, would you like to add anything?
You know what? I think that leads us to how when you create your support system,
Mm-hmm.
looking at your team and looking to see who's in your team. I think um, spirituality, having a prayer partner, having your pastor, your rabbi, who whatever your faith is, persuasion is. But I believe that knowing and having these people on your team ahead of time. Someone said resiliency. I know that came up a couple of times. It definitely adds to that. And I'm not saying just support system um, for the person with the diagnosis, but support system for the family as well. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that a lot of churches now are dealing with the whole man, the whole person. And so that's where it comes out, where it's not just you're not just a number, which is a good thing. It's not about maybe something that used to be in the past, and God is leading. And I can't speak for all churches, but I know in our congregation, He's definitely leading us into deeper community, more authentic communication. And when you can have that kind of trust system in place, it means the difference between you surviving and you kind of just, traveling along. So if I was to add anything to the conversation, it's just making sure that your your priest, your pastor, your reverend, your rabbi is part of your support system.
And sometimes, Tony, I'll add, you may have to go outside of your congregation. Every congregation isn't blessed like ours.
Yeah,
And so, in a situation where they're not supporting, they have some of the bad theology that we just discussed, you may have to venture out a little bit more to make sure you have the right people on your team. And so, sometimes, as I've experienced with some of the members, they've had some wrong spiritual directors on their team, and it caused more damage. As you mentioned, they barely survived when they could have been thriving, but they had the wrong people on the team. And so, some cases, you may have to venture out a little bit farther than your congregation to get that support that you need for not just you, but for the whole family.
that's awesome. I love that. I love that. That actually leads us to um, Tease, that you want to move to our next topic of discussion?
Yeah, that's fine because
Because
looking at
we're right there. We're totally right there. One of the things you wanted to talk about was when going through a mental health crisis, how can not only the person with the diagnosis, but how can caregivers receive some relief? And one of the things that is just true for them too is having a support system. And there could be other things which we'll bring up too, but it's important for caregivers to understand that, especially when a family member is in crises and you're having to try to figure out, okay, I'm trying to figure out insurance, I'm trying to figure out, oh my gosh, who's going to pick up the children, who's going to do, so in other words, having something in place for caregivers and people in that family unit to be able to function together. And so I know that there was some you mentioned earlier about the back of the insurance card. Was there anything else, Tease, that you wanted to mention just about um, support system and care for the caregiver?
Yeah, I think it's really important just to address the caregiver also and not to forget about the person that is caring because I've been on both sides. I've been the one receiving care and I've been the one caring for others.
Tony, that was a great point in terms of making sure the caregivers have the adequate support that they need, as well. And a lot of times we forget about those who are caring for others during a crisis and not really do what's necessary to help them with their own mental health and their own wholeness as well. One of the things that we did at our church, which I thought was just a small gesture, every quarter we have a day out for parents. And so
Mm,
parents can drop off their children and, for 2 or 3 hours, go and do whatever you want to do. We have a little pizza party. We have, some other things in a safe environment for the young people while the parents just get a little break. And some of the parents who I know, are dealing with mental health challenges, they said this was the best thing for me. I just needed that a long time. I've been caring for my children who are both bipolar, and I just needed a little time, and I needed to know they were in a safe environment. And
right,
so from that, it kind of, we still do it quarterly, but it even spun off to making sure that we have a caregiver support group. And so that's one of the things that we do at our church as well. So support for caregivers, because that is something that they need an outlet. They need a place where other people understand, what they're going through, what they're dealing with as they provide care for their family members or a loved one.
right, right. That's fantastic. I love hearing about churches taking up the mantle. I love hearing about churches coming up with solutions because we're all a family. We're
We
all a
are.
family. And I mean, when when a body of believers can come alongside of that family, it strengthens the family, but it also strengthens the relationship between the that congregation and the family in the future. You can always tell a family that has because they'll mention it. They'll say, "Oh, my church does this, or we have that, or something like that." So it's always fantastic. It looks like we may have lost Tease, but that's okay. When she logs back in, we will. Okay, she's logging back in. Okay.
Okay.
So in taking it to the next step, I know there was some resources that Letecia had, so we'll wait for her because I don't want to miss I don't want to miss those resources. But when you mentioned starting a support group, it sounds like it was a well received, program.
It was. It was long overdue, and they were just amazed that the church cared and wanted to provide resources and a support group for caregivers. And so we had many others, and so even now, as I do research, I don't see a lot of support groups for caregivers, especially caregivers, with those around mental health. And so it is very important, that we do that. And in this virtual space that we're in, webinars and other things, to bring people together so they can be resourced as a caregiver. We've done a few of those webinars as well with counselors, especially in this time of COVID. And I've had about 10 or 11 funerals where we couldn't really have a funeral. And
Right,
so, how do you, process that? How do you bring about closure,
right.
in this situation where you really can't have a service due to COVID-19? And so that is something that will wear on you mentally, physically, spiritually as well. And so we need to make sure that we resource, people in this particular time. So one of the things that we've done is, a service of remembrance. And so we just allow family members or congregation members to share their remarks, their reflections of the person that we're celebrating. And that brings that sense of closure to the congregation, to me, and to the family members to be in this virtual space and to be able to celebrate their loved one and hear how their loved one impacted all of us as they shared their time here on earth. And so, simple things like that, can help our mental health and our mental state.
That's awesome. That's fantastic. One of the things that I did want to bring up, because the dignity of people is really important. And all through the thread of what we've been talking about, whether it's from the beginning, you know, helping a single person, helping a family, helping a church congregation, the dignity of that family member is really important. So before we end, I do want to, you know, just talk about and bring up, um, how do we guard the dignity of our family member? And I love what you said about even at the end of life, you know, that's really, that's a way that you can guard the dignity of that person.
Right.
But when going through a mental health crisis, I guess if we can think of some tips for people, what are some tips that we can do to guard the dignity of our family member? I think that's important.
I think one of the things that we can do is, if we can't relate to it, then to make sure that we are an advocate, that we are a supporter, and so to make sure that we provide the space and we provide those platforms that no matter where we are, that we're always talking about the worth of our family members, talking about their dignity. Again, they're whole just as they are. They're not less than. And so, that is, one of the tips I always, tell people. Make sure that you make the distinction between the person and the diagnosis, just
That's
like we
right.
do for everything else physically. And so, as it relates to mental health, we need to make sure we do that. And if family members can just do that one thing, to make sure that they don't view the person as less than, they don't talk about the person as being less than, and they support, the individual and their worth and their dignity. And so, I talk to people all the time. I like building engines. I'm an engineer,
Mm,
and so a spark plug is a key component to an engine. And so, if you don't have a spark plug, or the spark plug is bad, no matter how expensive the engine is, it won't fire, it won't spark. And so, our brains are the same way. Our brains need certain things to spark. And so, if our brains don't have those spark plugs, some of us get the natural amount, and some need, medication to make sure that our brains fire the way that they should fire. And that's the whole goal, to make sure the brain is firing at its optimum level. And
I
so,
love
again,
that.
it's not less than, but it's just using the resources that God has allowed all of us, to receive, to make sure that our brain fires at the optimum level, that God made for it to, operate.
I love what you said. Um, the worth of the family member. I love that, and I recall, um, during the crisis I had mentioned earlier. I remember my brother at that time. Um, I don't even know what the conversation was. I just know my brother's response because I heard my brother's response, and my brother said, "That's not how I see her, and I'll wait until I can talk to her myself." And you know what? If we all can treat one another like that, you know, in terms of saying, you know what, um, I am I am going to love that person right where they are right now. It means so much. If the statistic is 1 in 4 people, I know it's high. I know it's a high statistic, but if 1 in 4 people are dealing with um, a foreseeable mental health diagnoses, then that means that there are many of us walking wounded
Right,
who
exactly.
have had, you know, opportunities to, either we have been treated well with our among our family, or maybe we've not been treated well. So in that instance, I think, the topic of forgiveness is really important too,
Yes, yes.
because it keeps grace, and I'll say this, grace and forgiveness, because both are
Right.
needed.
Both, exactly. And maybe equal amounts, right?
In equal amounts, yes. But it definitely keeps that engine oiled as well,
It does.
you know, because something can happen. Families we're known for, things happen in our families, and years go by and we don't. Oh, is Sally not talking to Ruby? Girl, you know they stopped talking when the last. Oh my God, you know.
Right.
So we need a lot of grace in our relationships and forgiveness
We
to
do.
just keep things well
Right.
oiled.
So Tony, that reminds me also, as we're talking about tips, what you just shared, we need to make sure that we respect their privacy. And so, in the midst of social media, in the midst of all that's going on now, and again, most people mean well, but we need to make sure that we respect people's privacy, and whatever we're going to
That's
share,
right.
we need to make sure that they have authorized us to share
That's right.
information. And so, again, a lot of times we cross those boundaries, and we violate their privacy. And so we do
Right.
more harm when we do that. And so again, respect them as an individual, but also respect their privacy. I know I want my privacy respected. And a lot of times, especially in the church context, I tell people, if we're going to make this announcement, did this person authorize us to say that they're dealing with a crisis, or they're in the hospital, or they're having surgery, or whatever it may be. I need them to authorize this because we want to respect their privacy. We don't want to violate or invade anyone's privacy.
That is key. That is key when we talk about the word dignity. We live, social media is here.
Yes.
And you never want to scroll through and say, oh my gosh, I didn't know, you know,
Right. Right.
or find your name on the prayer list. You're like, oh, I didn't know I was on the
Right. Right.
prayer list. But this has been an amazing conversation. We will the thing about technology is such that sometimes it just grows awry, but that's okay. Thank you, Letecia, for joining us and spearheading this. This has been just a good, honest conversation, I think. And Cary, I'm just so grateful that you spent time with us this afternoon.
Thanks, Tony and Leticia, for having me. I enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Well, we're gonna get on out of your way, but our next virtual talk for August, keep watch over the space wherever you're finding this virtual conversation, mental health hope with sisters, either on YouTube, Facebook, or wherever we find our platform. And know that our next conversation is going to be August, in toward the mid August, and we will be talking about building healthy children, going back to school, and making sure that our children are resilient. So thank you all so much.